الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Inshallah, we continue with our lesson. We're still in the chapter of Duaa from the book by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, Ad-Da' wad-Dawa, the sickness and the cure. So we said that the Duaa is one of the cures for the sicknesses of the heart and also for the sicknesses and the ailments of the body. So he continues with this chapter, Ad-Du'a min anfa' al-adwiya, that the Du'a is one of the most beneficial medicines. والدعاء من أنفع الأدوية وهو عدو البلاء يدافعه ويعالجه ويمنع نزوله ويرفعه أو يخففه إذا نزل وهو سلاح المؤمن. So the dua is the enemy of tribulation. It prevents it, or it protects from it, or it prevents it from coming down, and if it comes down, it will help to lift it up. So if a tribulation or a trial or a hardship or a sickness comes upon you and you make dua, it can lift it up for you. Or if you're continuous in your dua, it can prevent the sickness from coming down to you to begin with. كما روى الحاكم في صحيحه من حديث علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الدعاء سلاح المؤمن وعماد الدين ونور السماوات والأرض. That the dua is the weapon of the believer and the foundation of religion and the light of the heavens and the earth. So the dua, like he said earlier, and he goes and explains why with the hadith, the dua is a weapon of the believer. Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said, اتَّقِ دَعْوَةَ الْمَظْلُومِ, fear the dua of the one who is oppressed. Because the dua is just like a weapon. It goes straight to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it can hit, directly to anybody. The mazloom, he said, fear the Prophet ﷺ said, fear the da'wah or the prayers of the oppressed person. فَإِنَّهَا لَيْسَ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ حِجَابٌ, for verily there is no hijab or barrier between the oppressed person and Allah Azza wa Jal. And mazloom here in the hadith is am, meaning it's general. It didn't specify Muslim or non-Muslim. And even some scholars can say like animals, for example. So if you do dhulm to someone, even if it's a non-Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hates dhulm. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the dua is the weapon of the believer. So if a person is mazloom, he's oppressed, someone did wrong to him, or he's oppressing him, or he put him in a situation that disgraced him unjustly, and that person makes dua against the one who did him wrong, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can answer that dua. So it's very dangerous, to be careful not to be of those who are oppressing others or doing wrong to others. Because you might even make a wrong against a wali of Allah, and that's even more dangerous. من آذى لي ولي فقد آذنته بالحرب. Allah Azza wa Jalla said in the Hadith Qudsi, whoever makes an enemy of my wali, the one that I hold close to me, I have declared war upon him. So it's very dangerous to go against the awliya of Allah. It's very dangerous to make oppression, because the dua of a mu'min or the oppressed, the mazloom, is mustajab. And there's many stories from the ayat of the Quran when the anbiya made dua against their oppressors. If you go to the dua of Nuh alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered his dua and He made flood the whole earth, destroyed all those who oppressed him. Musa, the same thing. He kept calling Fir'aun, he kept calling the people of Egypt to come to Islam, to stop oppressing Bani Israel, to stop oppressing the children of Israel, and they kept doing the oppression. So finally Musa alayhi salam got upset and fed up, and he made the dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed the Fir'aun and his followers. From the seerah, or from the seerah of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, there's many stories, but one who was very well known to have his dua accepted was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. And he was one of the 10 who was given the glad tidings of paradise. At one point, he was, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he was placed as an Amir over Kufa. Kufa was a city in Iraq. And he was one of the most just and honorable emirs, and he did everything he could to help his people. But Kufa is known to have a lot of fitna in it. You know, at that time, and even, subhanAllah, even till today, there's a lot of fitna from that area. So the people always gave him a hard time. One person in particular, he lied about Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. He accused him of not doing the salat correctly, of not being just in his rulings, just total slander. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas gave him a chance to recant, and he didn't. And he said to him, if you don't, I will make dua against you. So he made dua. The man, you know, he kept to his story, which was a lie and slander. And Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he made dua against him, saying, basically, like, if you are lying, may Allah increase you in your umr, the length of your life, and blind you and expose you to fitna or disgrace. And all the Sahaba witnessed that this man, he became like blinded and disgraced and in poverty, and he used to chase around, like, you know, maidservant girls, like at an old age, like disgustingly. So people, like, he was the filth of society because of the dua of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Because when you slander somebody or you backbite unjustly and you ruin somebody's reputation, that's a form of oppression, and that person is mazloom. So he can make dua against you or against the person that does such a deed, and his dua was accepted. Also, the famous story of Sa'id ibn Jubair radiallahu anhu. He was one of the scholars of the Tabi'een, and he lived during the time of Hajjaj. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was one of the great, you know, oppressors at his time. He killed many, many Muslims. So even some of the scholars of Islam. And one of them was Sa'id ibn Jubair. And I have the story is kind of long, a little bit long, but I'll try to summarize it or translate some of it. So he called, you know, Sa'id ibn Jubair into his presence. He said, like, what's your name? And he said, Ismi Sa'id ibn Jubair. My name is Sa'id ibn Jubair. So Hajjaj said, Bal anta shaqiyun ibn Kabir, or ibn Kusayr, that you are you're a disgraced, you know, lowly person. He played on his name. قال سعيد أمي أعلم إذا سمتني. My mother, she knows better what she calls me, what she named me. شقيت أنت وشقيت أمك. And then Hajjaj said, like, may you be disgraced and may your mom be disgraced. And Sa'id, he said, الغيب يعلمه الله. Only Allah knows the unseen. And then Hajjaj said, ما رأيك في محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال سعيد نبي الهدى وأمام الرحمة. That, what's your opinion about Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم? He said he's the prophet of Huda, guidance, and he is the Imam of Rahmah, mercy, the leader of mercy. وقال ما رأيك في علي. He said, what's your opinion about Ali? He said, ذهب إلى الله إمام الهدى. He went to Allah as a leader of guidance. And then Hajjaj said, what's your opinion about me? About, you know, this, you could imagine he's in the court amongst this great leader who slaughtered so many people, and he's saying, what do you think about me, to this leader? And Sa'id ibn Jubair, he didn't fear. He said, ظالم تلقي الله بدماء المسلمين. You are an oppressor, and you'll meet Allah with the blood of the Muslims on your hand. قال حجاج علي ذهب والفضة فأتوا بكيسين من الذهب والفضة فأفرغهما بين يدي سعيد بن جبير. So Hajjaj called for some silver and gold, and he put it in front of Sa'id ibn Jubair. And Sa'id ibn Jubair, he said, ما هذا يا حجاج? What is this? إن كنت جمعت لتتقي به من غضب الله فنعم ما صنعت. وإن كنت جمعته من أموال الفقراء كبرا وعتوا والذي نفسي بيدي الفزع يوم العرض الأكبر تذل به كل مرضعة عما أرضعت تذهل به كل مرض عما أرضعت. So he said, like, if you did this to give it to you save yourself from the anger of Allah and to help the poor, then it's a great thing that you did. But if you took from the poor people, you took this wealth from the poor people so that you can show off and, like, you know, oppress her, basically, by the one in whose soul my hand is in, the fear on the day of judgment will make the pregnant woman basically, like, lose her own child, for example. Or the one that's breastfeeding, the woman, she'll even, you know, throw away her child out of fear of Allah. That day is so fearful. And so Hajjaj said, he called for a jariya. فطرقت الجارية على العود وخذت تغني فسالت دموع سعيد على لحيته. So the jariya, he called like a singing woman to come in front and sing in front of Sa'd with the oud, with like a guitar type noise. And so Sa'id, he started crying. And then Hajjaj asked him, why are you crying? Did you get affected by the music, by her voice, by her beautiful voice? And he said, no, I didn't get affected by that, but I'm fearful for being sinful in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he said, why don't you, like they made some type of joke or something like that, and he said, why don't you laugh like we laugh? And he said, because I remember the day that I will stand before my Lord, and I don't have time to laugh right now. And then he said, basically, like, I will summarize the story. So at the end of the day, he went through a bunch of stuff, and Sa'id ibn Jubayr kept refuting him, and he wasn't scared of him. So at the end he said, like, I'm going to kill you with a death that I haven't killed anybody with, like basically torture him to death. And he said, like, do what you want, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of me. So he took him and they killed him. But before he died, he was heard to say the dua, لا تصدد هذا المجرم على أحد بعدي. So he said to Allah, please don't allow this criminal, this dhalim, to hurt anybody after me. And they said, subhanAllah, as soon as Sa'id ibn Jubayr was killed, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was affected by a disgusting disease that was so painful he could not sleep, he couldn't use the bathroom, he couldn't do anything. He was running crazy for a month until he finally died himself. So Sa'id ibn Musayyib, his dua was accepted. You know, so always ittaqi dua al-mazlum. Fear the dua or the call of prayer or the prayer of the one who is being oppressed. فَلَيْسَ بَيْنَهَا وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ حِجَابٌ. There's no barrier between it and between Allah Azza wa Jal. You know. Then the Imam he goes on to say, الدعاء مع البلاء مقامات. With the dua has certain levels with tribulation or trials or hardship or sickness. Basically 3 مقامات. أحدها أن يكون أقوى من البلاء فيدافعه. First, it would be stronger than the tribulation that's about to fall upon you, so it prevents it from coming down. ثاني أن يكون أضعف من البلاء فيقوى عليه البلاء فيصاب به العبد ولكن قد يخففه وإن كان ضعيفا. The second state is that the bala, the sickness or the hardship, is stronger than the dua. So the servant that called upon Allah gets affected by the bala. But because of his dua, it might be less he might be less affected than he would have if he didn't make the dua. So the first case, the dua is stronger, it prevents the tribulation. The second case, the sickness or the tribulation is stronger and it comes down upon the servant. In the third case, أن يتقاوما ويمنع كل واحد منهما صاحبه. In the third case, they're even, the dua and the sickness or the dua and the tribulation, so they prevent each other from happening basically. وقد روى الحاكم في صحيحه من حديث عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يغني حذر من قدر والدعاء ينفع بما نزل ومما لم ينزل وإن البلاء ينزل فليلقاه الدعاء فيتعالجان إلى يوم القيامة. Basically that, you know, no matter how careful you are, it does not prevent qadr. However, he's saying that the dua will benefit you with something that is coming down or something that does not come down. And verily the sickness or the tribulation, while it's coming down, it will meet with the dua, and the dua will wrestle with it until the day of judgment, basically preventing it from coming down to you. So continue in your dua regardless, right? Just in case. As we said, it can prevent the dua completely, or even if it can prevent the sickness or the ailment or the tribulation completely, or if the tribulation comes down, it can be less upon you. So continue in dua. Also, if the tribulation comes, you can make dua to take it off of you. وفيه أيضا من حديث أمير عمر رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الدعاء ينفع مما نزل ومما لم ينزل فعليكم عباد الله بالدعاء. That the dua benefits that which comes down and that which hasn't come down yet. So I advise you, my servants of Allah, with dua. وفيه أيضا من حديث ثوبان عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا يرد القدر إلا الدعاء ولا يزيد في العمل إلا البر وإن الرجل ليرحم الرزق بذنب يصيبه. That verily nothing prevents the qadr except the dua. We're going to explain this later on inshallah, but nothing prevents the decree except the dua. And nothing increases the actions except with righteousness, al-bir. And a person may be prevented from his provision by something haram he did. So if a person does haram, he could actually be prevented from rizq that's going to come to you. Like say you're going to receive, you know, $1,000, but you started falling into certain sins, Allah may prevent that $1,000 from coming to you. Then he goes on to fasl al-ilhah fi du'a, like being insistent or persistent in making du'a. Like you have a sense of urgency. You don't give up, like a pressing issue. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be when you make du'a to Him. You know, like it's very urgent, it's very keen, it's very dear. You know, it's like emergency time. You got to call on Allah. So من أنفع الأدوية الإلحاح في الدعاء. So one of the most beneficial of medicines is to have this persistence or this insistence in your dua. وقد روى ابن ماجه في سننه من حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من لم يسأل الله يغضب عليه. Whoever doesn't ask Allah, Allah will be angry with him. We mentioned this last week. وفي صحيح الحاكم من حديث أنس أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تعجزوا في الدعاء فإنه لا يهلك مع الدعاء أحد. Like don't give up on making dua, for verily nobody gets destroyed with making dua. Like the more dua you make, inshallah, if you're always continuous in your dua, you won't get destroyed. وذكر الأوزاعي عن زهري عن أورى عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله يحب الملحين في الدعاء. That Allah, He loves the ones who are persistent or insistent in the dua. You know. وفي كتاب الزهد للإمام أحمد عن قتادة قال قال مورق ما وجدت المؤمن مثلا إلا رجلا في البحر على خشية فهو يدعو يا رب يا رب لعل الله عز وجل أن ينجيه. That he said, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he heard the statement from Muwarriq that the mu'min, like the best example to make dua is like a person in the sea, in the ocean, and he's about to be destroyed and drowned, and he calls on Allah, Ya Rabb, Ya Rabb. This is like the best form of dua. You know, because you're so sincere, you're so scared, you don't have no one to turn to except Allah. This is how we should be in our dua when we want to make something, when we really want something, when we're really asking Allah for something, we should be like in that state. You know, like you're about to die. Another scholar, he said, he was asked about, you know, how should we be in our dua, like how should we make dua? And he pointed to a baby crying, and he said, you see that baby crying and calling upon its mom? He said, yes. And he said, will he continue to cry? Yes. Until when? Until the mom answers his call. He said, be like that baby when you call upon Allah Azza wa Jal. Like cry and call upon and be insistent in your dua until your dua is accepted. The next section he says, من آفات الدعاء, from the barriers or the obstacles to dua, التي تمنع ترتيب أثر الدعاء عليه أن يستعجل العبد ويستبطئ الإجابة فيتحسر ويدعو الدعاء وهو بمنزلة من بذر بذرا أو غرس غرسا فجعل يتعاهده ويسقيه فلما استبطأ كماله وإدراكه تركه وأهمله. So he said that from the barriers or the obstacles for your dua to be accepted or to answered is when you're hurried to make dua. Like you make dua and you want it to happen like just like that, 1 second, your dua is answered. And if it doesn't come right away, you give up on your dua. These are one of the ways that your dua might not get accepted because you give up before it's too late. And he said that's like the comparison of when you plant a seedling or a seed and you water it and you take care of it, but it's not coming up. So you just give up on it and it dies. It shrivels up and dies. With a plant, you want to keep watering it and take care of it, and it takes some time. It takes patience, and eventually it'll come up. It'll come out. That's the same thing with dua. You know, like I said last week, the dua will be answered regardless. Either Allah Azza wa Jal will give you what you asked for, or He'll prevent the harm from coming to you, or He'll save something better for you on the Day of Judgment. So always continue in making dua. وفي صحيح البخاري من حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يستجاب لأحدكم ما لم يعجل يقول دعوت فلم يستجيب لي. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said that the person's dua is answered as long as he does not rush it. You know, when you keep making dua and you say like it didn't happen, and my dua wasn't answered, and you stop making that dua, so it's not accepted. However, if you're continuous in your dua, it will be accepted regardless. وفي صحيح مسلم لا يزال يستجاب العبد ما لم يدعو بإثم أو قطيعة الرحم ما لم يستعجل وما لم يستعجل. قيل يا رسول الله وما الاستعجال؟ قال يقول قد دعوت وقد دعوت فلم أرى يستجاب لي فيستحسر عند ذلك ويدعو الدعاء. He said that a person, his dua, the slave's person, his dua is continuously accepted or will be accepted as long as he doesn't call for an ithm, like haram thing. We mentioned some examples last week. Or he asked for cutting the relation of the womb. Like you can't make dua to cut off the relations of the womb with your family, for example. And also if you do not hurry up or seek that your dua comes right away. If you make dua and you want it like right away, it doesn't come to you and you give up, then also that case your dua is not accepted. وفي مسند أحمد حديث أنس قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال العبد بخير ما لم يستعجل. قال يا رسول الله كيف نستعجل؟ قال يقول قد دعوت ربي فلم يستجب لي. He said that the person will continue to be in good as long as he's not hurried in his dua. And they asked him, "Oh Messenger of Allah, what is being hurried in your dua or being hurried in dua?" He said that you say, "I was calling on Allah, I was making prayer, I was making dua, and He didn't answer my prayer." In that case, the dua won't be accepted. So always continue in your dua. Don't give up. The next section he says, أوقات الإجابة, the time that the dua is answered. وإذا جمع مع الدعاء حضور القلب وجمعيته بكليته على المطلوب وصادف وقتا من أوقات الإجابة الستة. So he's saying that when you're making dua and your heart is really into it, and basically you're putting all your effort to reach that which you're asking for. You're putting all your effort into it. You have ilhah, you're calling Allah, you have focus, right? And your heart is upon what you're saying, and that happens to hit a time that the dua is accepted, inshallah your dua will be accepted. And now he's going to mention some of the times. He says there's 6 major times. So ثلث الليل الأخير, the last third of the night. وعند الأذان, when the adhan is called. وبين الأذان والإقامة, in between the adhan and iqama. وإدبار الصلوات المكتوبات, and after each of the salawat, the farida, the obligatory prayers. وعند صعود الإمام يوم الجمعة على المنبر, and when the imam climbs upon the minbar on the day of Jum'ah, on the Friday prayer, until the end of the salat. وآخر ساعة بعد العصر, and some scholars say the last hour after Asr before Maghrib on the day of Jum'ah, the dua is accepted. So these are the 6 major times the dua is answered. So it's important, or if you have something important you want to make dua for, try to seek one of those times. وصادف خشوعا في القلب وانكسارا بين يدي الرب وذلا له وتضرعا ورقعا واستقبل الداعي القبلة. And he said also, if you go and you make dua during these times, and you have a humbled heart, and basically like you break down to Allah, inkisar بين يدي الرب, like you humble yourself to the point like you're broken, you have nowhere to go except to Allah, and you humble and you put yourself low, and you face the qibla, and you're upon tahara, وكان على طهارة, ورفع يديه إلى الله, and you hold up your hands to Allah, and you start with Alhamdulillah wa thana alayhi, you praise Allah and you send salutations or praises, different praises upon Him. ثم ثناء بالصلاة على محمد عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and then you say the salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. ثم قدم بين يديه حاجته التوبة والاستغفار, and then before you ask for what you need, you make tawbah and istighfar, repentance, and ask Allah for forgiveness. ثم دخل على الله وألح عليه في المسألة, and then you enter with your heart to Allah Azza wa Jal, and you're insistent in your calling and your prayers and what you're asking for. وَدَعَهُ رَغْبَةً وَرَهْبَةً, and you call upon Him with fear and with hope. وَتَوَسَّلْ إِلَيْهِ بِأَسْمَاهِ وَصِفَاتِهِ وَتَوْحِيدِهِ, and you get close to Him with His names and His attributes and His oneness. وَقَدَّمَ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ دُعَاهِ صَدَقَةً, or you can put forth before your dua some type of charity. فَإِنَّ هَذَا دُعَاء لَا يَكَادِ رَدًّا أَبَدًا, so this type of dua, all with all the characteristics we mentioned, is most likely never to be refused by Allah Azza wa Jal. ولا سيما إن صادف الأدعية التي أخبر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنها مظن الإجابة, especially if you make the dua that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, that is most likely to be answered. أو أنها متضمنة للاسم الأعظم. Or if you call upon Allah with His great names. So there's a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if you call upon Allah with His great name, Allah will answer it. And there's different interpretations of this hadith. What are the great names of Allah Azza wa Jal? And he's going to go into that right now. So he says some of the authentic du'as that you can make that are likely to be accepted, inshaAllah, is the one first he said, فَمِنْهَا مَا فِي السُّنَنِ وَالصَّحِيحِ بن حبان من حديث عبد الله ابن بريدة عن أبيه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم سمع رجلا يقول اللهم إني أسألك بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد فقال لقد سأل الله بالاسم الذي إذا سئل به أعطاه وإذا دعي به أجاب وفي لفظ لقد سألت الله باسمه الأعظم. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said he heard a man making the dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi anni ashhadu annaka anta Allah. Oh Allah, I ask you by bearing witness that there is no one worthy of worship except you. The Al-Ahad as-Samad, the one, the eternal, the one that's not born nor gives birth, and there's no likeness unto him. The Prophet ﷺ said, anybody who asks Allah with this dua, it will be accepted. In another narration, he is asked by Allah's great name. So some scholars said this is the great name of Allah. Like قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, basically put into dua form. As you ask Allah with this dua, your dua will be accepted. Another narration, وفي سنن صحيح ابن حبان أيضا من حديث أنس بن مالك أنه كان مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم جالسا ورجل يصلي ثم دعا فقال اللهم إني أسألك أن لك الحمد لا إله إلا أنت المنان بديع السماوات والأرض يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا حي يا قيوم فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لقد دعا الله باسمه العظيم الذي إذا دعي به أجاب وإذا سئل به أعطى. So this man, he said in another dua that the Prophet ﷺ overheard, Oh Allah, I ask you by your oneness and that there's no one worthy of worship except you, the all generous, the creator or the starter of the heavens and the earth, the all majestic, the all honorable, the all living, the sustainer. And the Prophet ﷺ said that if you call with this dua, you have called by Allah's great name and Allah will answer your dua. In another narration by Imam Tirmidhi, the Prophet ﷺ said, Ism Allah al-A'adam fi hatayn al-ayatayn wa ilahukum ilahun wahid la ilaha illahu ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Another scholars say that the great names of Allah are Rahman ar-Rahim because of this hadith. So as we're going through all these, just pay attention to some of the names and try to use all of them if you can in the dua, because inshallah they're all from these Asma' Allah al-Uzma, the great names of Allah Azza wa Jal. Another narration, or another ayah, Alif Lam Mim, Allahu la ilaha illahu al-Hayyul Qayyum. So this is another possibility to be from the great names of Allah Azza wa Jal, Al-Hayyul Qayyum, the all-living, the all-sustaining, the all-sustainer. In another narration by Imam Ahmed, Aladhu biyadha al-Jalali wal-Ikram, like basically hold tight to the saying Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram, O majestic one, O honorable or generous one. Like call upon Ya Dhal Jalali wal Ikram. This can also be Allah's great names. In another narration by Tirmidhi, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam كان إذا أهمه الأمر ورفع رأسه إلى السماء وإذا اجتهد في الدعاء قال يا حي قيوم. That if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had like a hardship come upon him, he was known to like lift his hands and his head to the sky and say Ya Hayyum Ya Qayyum, the live one, the sustainer. Another narration, if he was grieved, he would say Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith, the one who was all living, the one who is the sustainer of everything, in your mercy I seek help. Another narration by Hakim, اسم الله الأعظم في ثلاث سور من القرآن البقرة وآل عمران وطه. So the Prophet ﷺ said that the great name of Allah is in 3 surahs, Baqarah, Ali Imran and Taha. And this is because the same ones are saying is Al-Hayyul Qayyum. This is narrated in all three of these surahs. And another great dua the Prophet ﷺ said, encouraged us to make, is the dua of the Noon, Yunus alayhi salam. Anybody know that dua? Yusuf, you should know because it was in the class. Who knows the dua of the Noon, the one that was in the belly of the whale? Yeah. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. This is another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, he said to make this dua. And it's one of the du'as the scholars say that can take you out of a hardship. Because we all know the story of the Noon, Yunus alayhi salam. You know, he kind of like gave up on his people. He's kind of fed up with them because he kept calling them to Islam and they won't accept it. So he left without the permission of Allah Azza wa Jal. And he was on the boat. And long story short, he got swallowed by the whale in the middle of the ocean. And he went, so they said he was in the darkness of the ocean, in the belly of the whale. And where are you going to go from there, right? There's no way out. So he made this dua. And even Allah Azza wa Jal said that if he hadn't made that dua, he would stay there until the Day of Judgment. So he said, La ilaha illa ant subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Verily there is no one worthy of worship except you. There's no one except you. And I was of the ones who were unjust. So this is a good dua to make if you're in any time of hardship, inshaAllah. In the hadith it says, إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَدْعُوا بِهَا مُسْلِمٌ فِي شَيْءٍ قَدْ إِلَّا اسْتَجَابَ اللَّهُ لَهُ. That a Muslim doesn't use this dua for anything except that Allah will answer him. And also in Al-Mustadrak by Hakim, rahimahullah, من حديث سعد بن عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ألا أخبركم بشيء إذا نزل برجل منكم أمرا مهم فدعا به يفرج الله عنه دعاء the noon. He said, shouldn't I tell you of a dua if something hardship comes upon one of you, or upon a man of you, or upon a woman of you, what kind of dua you should make? If it's like an important affair that hits you, the dua of the noon, Yunus alayhi salam, the dua that we just made. So this dua is a great dua we should always make as well. And the reason they said the interpretation or the explanation of the Prophet ﷺ, because in the ayah itself it says فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So we answered his call and we saved him from this hardship, and that's how we save the believers. So that's how we save the believers, Allah is saying in the Quran, by making this dua. So make this dua sincerely, and if you're in any type of hardship, if something bad is happening to you, or bad is happening to your family, or you are oppressed, or there's nowhere out, call upon Allah with this dua. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. فأيما مسلم دعا بها في مرضه 40 مرة فمات في مرضه ذلك أعطى أجر الشهيد وإن بري مغفور له. Another narration, I don't know how authentic it is, but it says if you say this dua 40 times in a sickness and you die in that sickness, you will have the reward of a shaheed, of a martyr. And if you are healed of that sickness, all your sins will be forgiven. So it's a beautiful dua and it's easy to memorize, and inshallah we can make it often. In another narration in the Bukhari and Muslim, عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يقول عند الكرب لا إله إلا الله العظيم الحليم لا إله إلا الله رب العرش العظيم لا إله إلا الله رب السماوات السبع ورب العرش الكريم. That there's no one worthy of worship except Allah, the all great, the all forbearing. And there's no one worthy of worship than Allah, the Lord of the great throne. And there's no one worthy of worship except Allah, the Lord of the heavens, the 7 heavens, and the earth, and the great or the honorable throne. So all these du'as, inshallah, are likely for you to be accepted as you use them, inshallah, by the names and attributes of Allah. لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم سبحان الله وتبارك الله رب العرش العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. There's no one worthy of worship except Allah, Al-Halim Al-Kareem, the forbearing, the honorable, the generous. Subhanallah wa tabarakallah Rabbil Arsh Al-Azim. Glory be to Allah, the Lord of the great throne. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Another beautiful dua, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ما أصاب أحدا قد هم ولا حزن فقال اللهم إني عبدك ابن عبدك ابن أمتك ناصيتي بيدك ماض في حكمك عدل في قضاءك أسألك اللهم بكل اسم هو لك سميت به نفسك أو علمته أحد من خلقك أو أنزلته في كتابك أو استأثرت به في علم الغيب عندك أن تجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلبي ونور صدري وجلاء حزني وذهاب همي إلا أذهب الله عز وجل همه وحزنه وأبدله مكانه فرحا. فقيل رسول الله ألا نتعلمها قال بلى ينبغي لمن سمعها أن يتعلمها. So this is another beautiful dua with Allah's names and attributes. The Prophet ﷺ said that if anybody comes upon him like grief or sadness and he makes this dua, Allah will take away his grief and replace it with happiness. So he says, "O Allah, I am the son of your servant, the father, and the son of your female servant, the mother. My head is in your hand, and your ruling or your decree is upon me. Your decree is, your wisdom is upon me, and your decree is just. I ask you, O Allah, by all of your names that you've named yourself with, or that you have taught anybody from your creation, or if you've sent it down in your book, or you've kept it with you in the unseen knowledge, that you make the Quran, the great Quran, a light of my heart, and taken away the grief and my sadness." And if anybody makes this dua, inshallah we should all memorize it as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away your grief. In this hadith is another important lesson. Like, I don't know if anybody knows the hadith that if you memorize the 99 names of Allah, or with understanding, that you will enter into paradise. Anybody? Okay. So how many names does Allah have? 99. Huh? Infinite? Who says 99? Raise your hands. 99. 99. No? Okay. طيب. So in this hadith he says, أو استأثرت به في العلم غيب عندك. So there's other names that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept in ilm al-ghayb عنده. Right? So we know for sure there's more than 99. أو علمت أحد من خلقك. Or if you taught one of your creation. The creation is many besides the human beings, right? Also the scholars have derived more than 99 names from the Quran and authentic Sunnah. So this means it's not limiting. It didn't say that Allah only has 99 names. It just says if you memorize or understand 99 of His names, you will enter into paradise. But there's more than that. And this is the hadith that proves otherwise, right? Then the Imam, he goes on to show some of the effects of the dua for the salihin. Like we said earlier, be careful of the dua of the oppressed, right? Because the dua of the oppressed is accepted. He mentioned the story of one of the pious companions of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, كان رجل من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من الأنصار يكنى أبا معلق. So one of the companions of the Prophet, he was called Abu Mu'allaq. وكان تاجرا يتجر بماله ولغيره. And he was like a famous businessman that used to do business with his own wealth and the wealth of others. So one day he was coming back from a business trip, passing through a certain valley, and a criminal, like a thief, came up to him and said, give me your money, I'm going to kill you. And he said, you can have my money, but why do you want to kill me? He said, I already have your money, don't worry about that, but I just want to kill you. And he said, well, if you want to kill me, can you just give me the chance to pray 4 rak'ahs to Allah Azza wa Jal, so I can die in peace? And he said, all right, I'll give you that, go ahead and pray. So he went and he started praying and praying and praying the 2 rak'ahs. And then he called upon Allah. He said, Ya Wadud, Ya Wadud, Ya Dhil Arsh al-Majid, Ya Fa'ala lima turid, As'aluka bi'izzati alladhi la yuram, wa bimulkika alladhi la yudam, wa binurika alladhi mala'a arkana arshika, an takfini sharri hadha al-lis. Ya Mughith aghithni 3 marrat. Ya Mughith aghithni, he said. So he said in this dua, oh my beloved, the beloved one, the all-loving, Allah is Wadud. Ya Dhil Arsh al-Majid, the one who has the great throne. Ya Fa'al lima turid, the one who does whatever he wants. As'aluka bi'izzati la yuram, I ask you by your honor and glory that can never be broken through. وَمِلْكِكَ الَّذِي لَا يُضَامُ, and by your kingdom that can never be encompassed, and by your light that fills the throne and everything under it, that you may take care of this thief and take his evil away from me. Ya Mughith aghithni, oh the one who helps, give me help. Oh the one who helps, give me help. He said it 3 times. فإذا هو بفارس قد أقبل بيده حرب قد وضعها بين أذني فرسه فلما بصر به اللص أقبل نحوه فطعنه فقتله ثم أقبل إليه فقال قم. So he said, as soon as he made this dua, when he finished the salat, making this dua, he saw a knight rushing forward on his horse with a spear between the ears of the horse, basically pointed at this thief. And the thief faced him and tried basically what's up? He tried to face this knight. He said before, within a blink of an eye, the thief was killed instantly by this beautiful knight that he never seen nothing like it before in his life. And he said, "Man anta bi abi anta wa ummi." Who are you by my father and mother? فَقَدْ أَغَاثَنِي اللَّهُ بِكَ الْيَوْمِ. For verily Allah has helped me through you today. فَقَالَ أَنَا مَلِكٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ السَّمَاءِ الرَّابِعَةِ. I am an angel from the 4th heavens. دعوت بدعاك الأول فسمعت الأبواب السماء فقعقعها. He said that you called with your first dua and the heavens shook. ثم دعوت بدعاك الثاني فسمعت لأهل السماء ضجة. And then the next time you called it, they heard a great noise. ثم دعوت بدعاك الثالثة فقيل لي دعاء مكروب فسألت الله أن يولنيني قتله. He said, then you called it the 3rd time, and Allah, He said, this is the dua of the one who is in hardship, that's troubled. So I asked permission from Allah if I can take care of this thief for him. And Allah gave me permission, and I took care of him. قال الحسن فمن تودع وصلى 4 ركعات ودعا بهذا الدعاء استجيب له مكروبا كان أو غير مكروبا. He said, Hassan radiallahu anhu, if you make you make wudu and pray 4 rak'ats, and you call Allah with this dua, Allah will answer your dua, even if you're in a hardship or if you're not in a hardship. And this is the beauty of the du'as that we should learn from our predecessors. Dhuruf al-du'a, or the basically states of du'a. وكثيرا ما تجد أدعية دعاء بها قوما فاستجيب لهم ويكون قد اقترن بدعاء ضرورة صاحب وإقباله على الله وحسنة تقدمت من جعل الله سبحانه إجابة دعوته شكرا لحسنته. So he's saying that the states of dua, sometimes the dua can be accompanied by a good deed, right? And your dua is answered because of that good deed. Also he said, sometimes it's just because of the time and the place that you make the dua. Like we mentioned those times that the dua is accepted, right? You make a dua in that time and place and the dua is accepted. So he's saying just to be careful, because sometimes people confuse the dua with these type of situations. Like sometimes you might do a good deed and the dua is accepted, but you make that same dua without doing the good deed, it's not accepted. Or you might make dua in a certain time in a certain place and it's accepted, but you make the same dua in a different time in a different place and it's not accepted, right? So he said basically he's teaching us to be, careful to take all of the likelihoods of your dua being answered into account, And it's not necessary that your dua was answered because of this reason, that it will be answered because of that reason again, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He chooses how He wills to answer your dua. And some of the shurut al-du'a al-mustajab, the requirements for your dua to be accepted, الأدعية والتعوذات بمنزلة السلاح, that the dua and the seeking refuge with Allah is like a weapon. والصلاح بضاربه لا يجد بحده لا بحده قط. And the salah, the weapon, is by the one who is using the weapon, not by the weapon itself, right? So the one who is using the weapon can be an experienced warrior or knight and know how to use the sword or the spear, and he's excellent with it and proficient with it, and his weapon is effective. However, an amateur or a person doesn't know how to hold the weapon or know how to use it at all, he can have that same weapon but it won't be effective at all. The same thing with the dua, right? The person, if he's in a good state of making dua, the dua is a weapon for him. However, if that person is a weak state, he's a sinful person, he's a heedless person, he's not making dua with sincerity from his heart, that same dua might not be accepted from him. So basically you have the weapon, the person holding the weapon, and the barriers to that weapon. So if you have the weapon is good, and the person holding the weapon is good, but there's barriers preventing that weapon from being effective, then dua will not be effective. If you have the weapon is good, and the person holding the weapon is good, and there's no barriers to that dua, the dua will be answered. So these are the main points of having your dua being accepted and not prevented, inshaAllah. And we know to call upon Allah Azza wa Jal with some of His names and attributes that we learned in this book. Inshallah, you can go back and I can give you a copy, or there's translations online as well. You can look it up. Inshallah, try to memorize some of these ad'iyah, these prayers. And we need to, like, as Muslims, take as many steps and precautions we can to have our dua being accepted. So we said last week, dua huwa al-ibadah. Dua huwa al-ibadah. The dua is the essence of worship. If it's the essence of worship, we want that worship to be accepted by Allah Azza wa Jal. So we can take all the precautions for it to be accepted. You know, the different states that you're in personally in terms of wudu, praying, having a clean heart, the place that you make the dua, the time that you make the dua, that you're insistent in your dua, you have ilhah in it, calling and insistence and persistence. You call upon Allah with a humble heart, like we said, to be like that baby crying for his mother. It doesn't stop crying until it gets what it wants from its mother. Go and cry before your Lord and call upon Him, and don't give up until you get what you want. And like I said, you're going to get what you want one day, either in this dunya or in the next life. So don't give up on dua. And the main point also we said in this lesson is that the dua is a silah al-mu'min. The dua is the weapon of the believer. So be very careful how you use the dua. Be careful what you make dua for. Right? Because that salah, that weapon could also be turned on yourself. You make the dua for the wrong thing, it can actually harm you. Always try to use the dua or the ad'iyah that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, or that we find in the Quran, or that's been known amongst the salihin. Those are the best forms of dua. Right? It's very simple. We don't have to complicate matters. Sometimes when you make dua for a specific thing, that specific thing might not be pleasing to Allah, it might not be good for you. It might cause harm in your deen. That's why I always put the affair to Allah. In kana khayran fi dini wa dunyaya faqdirhu li. If it's good in my religion, in my worldly affairs and in my religion, write it for me. Leave the amr to Allah Azza wa Jal when you make dua. And also, ittaqi da'i al-mazlum, be careful of the dua of the one who is oppressed. Never be of the oppressors. Allah, He hates oppression. Never put yourself in a position that you offend an awliya or wali of Allah and he makes dua against you. We mentioned some of the stories of the anbiya and of the salihin of the past. What happens when they make dua against the ones who oppress them. Some of the important points we can try to just go over briefly in terms of the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. So, calling upon Allah with His names and attributes is a form of wasila. And a wasila is like kind of an intermediary or a way to get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. In the Sharia, there's 3 wasa'il that are agreed upon by the scholars. And that is to call upon Allah Azza wa Jal with His names and attributes, or to call upon Allah Azza wa Jal using your good deeds, or to call upon Allah Azza wa Jal through the dua of a pious person, right? And there's another one that's kind of a disagreement amongst the scholars, so I'm not going to get into that one. This one, every scholar is in agreement about. So we'll go into this a little bit, inshaAllah. Just some principles you have when you understand the names and attributes of Allah. It's good to keep in mind. The first principle is a form of a question. So you ask yourself or anybody, who is the most knowledgeable about Allah? I'll ask you guys, who is the most knowledgeable about Allah? Huh?
Who's the most knowledgeable about Allah?
Yes. Allah. So that's the first question. Like, who is more knowledgeable about Allah than Allah? No one, obviously. So what Allah Azza wa Jalla says in His book of the Quran, He knows how to best describe His name and attributes. There's no one more knowledgeable than Him. The second question, who is most knowledgeable from the creation of Allah, about Allah? Close. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because he's the final messenger and the greatest prophet. So he is the most knowledgeable about Allah Azza wa Jal from the creation of Allah. Right? So if he says something about Allah and his names and attributes, we take that at its face value. No one more knowledgeable about Allah than himself, and no one more knowledgeable from the creation of Allah about Allah than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So therefore, that which is related in the Quran and in the Sunnah, that's how we know our Lord, His name and attributes. It's tawqifi. Basically, there's no, we're going to get into it inshallah, but basically the text of the Quran, we take it as its face value about Allah and His Messenger, or what Allah said in His book, and what the Messenger ﷺ said in his Sunnah about Allah. Right? Because nobody else can know better than them. It's also, the scholars say, to be, to take the meaning at its apparent value. Like Allah says it in the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ says it in the Sunnah, in the Arabic language, is very clear. You cannot delve into the names and attributes of Allah and try to explain it in your own interpretation. Right? You have to leave it as it says. Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمِ وَالْبَغْيِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Say, my Lord has forbidden immoralities, what is apparent of them, like, fahish, evil stuff, what is apparent of them, and that was concealed from the sin, and oppression without right, and that you associate with Allah that which is not sent down in authority, and that you say about Allah that which you do not know. You cannot speak about Allah's names or attributes from your own opinion, because that will be falling under this ayah, and it's one of the greatest and most evils of sins, to the point of going out of Islam. Also, to show that we take the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal in apparent value, we have the famous statement by Imam Malik rahimahullah. A man came up to him and he asked him about the istiwa, the rising of Allah Azza wa Jal. And he said, Al-istiwa'u ma'loom wal-kayfiyatu majhul wa-su'al anha bid'ah. That the istiwa is ma'loom, it's known what it means in the Arabic language, right? And the how is majhul, it's not known. And asking about it is a form of innovation. In another narration it says, you are a person of deviation, innovation, get out of this masjid, right? Because this person, he knew he came with a bad intention to try to confuse the people. No one can understand Allah Azza wa Jal completely, because the creation cannot completely understand the Creator. We can only know about Him through His book and through the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we cannot delve deeply into that. So be very careful about how you're going to talk about Allah's names and attributes. The second principle is concerning the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, and under this are like 4 main subtitles you can say. So the first one of this, so now we're talking about Allah's names. The second principle is about Allah's names. His names are all beautiful, and it's the utmost beauty and excellence. Allah has the perfect names. وَاللَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوا بِهَا. Allah has the most beautiful names, call Him with them. Secondly, the names are not limited to a specific number, and we said that already, and we explained that why. Third, the names of Allah are not established by human intellect. Rather, they are established by revelation. Right? We said it's tawqifiyya. That means that you can't say something about Allah's names or attributes from your own opinion or from your own intellect. If the name or attribute does not occur in the Quran or the authentic Sunnah, you cannot call Allah by these names or describe Him with these attributes. Fourth, every name from the names of Allah is a proof of Allah Azza wa Jal, and it is a attribute can be derived from it. So all of Allah's names, you can derive attributes from it. For example, if I say Ar-Rahman, what's the attribute of Ar-Rahman? The most merciful. Anybody? If you guys don't understand anything, just like stop me and ask, because I know it might be a little bit technical. So the principle we're talking about now is that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names, all are like a proof for Himself. Like altogether they prove that Allah has a self and He exists. So the most merciful, the most powerful, the all-seeing, the all-hearing, these are all proofs of Allah Azza wa Jalla in itself. Also from this, that you can derive attributes. From Allah's names, all Allah's names you can derive an attribute. So if I said Allah is Ar-Rahman, that's His name, Ar-Rahman. What's the attribute we can derive from Ar-Rahman? Huh? Compassion, Rahmah. If I said Allah is Al-Basir, the all-seeing, we can say what? His attribute is seeing. Yeah. Al-Qawi, the all-strong. Huh? Strength. Okay, Al-Alim, because you want knowledge, mashallah. Al-Alim, the all-knowing. The attribute would be ilm, knowledge. So you have names and you have attributes. From all the names of Allah Azza wa Jalla, you can derive attributes. However, vice versa is not correct. Like not all attributes can you take you can make a name out of it. Right? So this is one of the principles of the names of Allah Azza wa Jalla also. A third issue we're going to talk about is so we talked about the names of Allah, now we talk about the attributes, inshallah. Also with the attributes of Allah, they are all perfect and most beautiful as well. There's no deficiency in them. So any type of attribute or characteristic that has deficiency in it, you can't call Allah with it, right? So for example, ignorance or deafness or blindness or injustice or anything like that, you can't call Allah with that. And also, for example, you'll find in certain ayat and hadith that that Allah Azza wa Jal, like He, for example, plots against the evildoers, right? So plotting is the attribute. You can't call Allah like the plotter. You can't derive a name from this attribute, right? Because it's not befitting of Allah to be a name of like the plotter. So it's a technical issue. Inshallah, we can get into it more if you have any questions. But the basis is that every name you can derive an attribute from it, but not every attribute can you derive a name from it. Also, the attributes of Allah are divided into two categories: thubutiyya wa salbiyya. Thubutiyya is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established for Himself. You know, for example, He says that He has knowledge, He has seeing, He has life, He has strength. These are something that He has made ithbat for Himself, thubutiyya. A salbiyya or nafiyya, like something that He has negated upon Himself. So He's negated dhulm, injustice upon Himself. He's negated sleep upon Himself. He doesn't need sleep, right? So these are also some of the principles we can understand Allah's names and attributes. Also, Allah's attributes are dhatiyya and fi'liyya. So there's attributes that describe Allah's self, and there's attributes that describe Allah's actions, and they're different. And same thing, I don't know if I mentioned it with the names, but the same thing with the attributes. You always remember the principle: لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There's nothing like unto Him, and He is the all hearing, the all seeing. This is an important principle in Islam. You know, anything you could think of, it's not like Allah. So, for example, Allah, He is as-Sami'. In this same ayah we just recited, He's the one who can hear everything, right? And we have sam'a too. We can hear as well. Is our hearing like that of Allah Azza wa Jal? No, of course not. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. You know, so there's no likeness unto Allah. Anything you can think of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far greater. You know, when the angel Jibreel alayhi salam came down to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he filled the horizon, the whole sky. In some narrations he had over 600 wings, right? Can you just imagine like that? Try to imagine that yourself. It's almost impossible, right? So imagine Allah, creator of the heavens and the earth, greater than everything. He knows every single leaf that drops, every speck of dust, every thought in your head, right? There's no comparison. For ilm, for example, Allahu ya'lamu ma kana wa ma ka'in wa ma lam yakun law kana kayfa yakun. Allah, He knows what was and what is and what will be, and what wasn't, if it was, how it would be. Right? Ilmun tamun kamilun. Allah has the perfect knowledge. But our knowledge, al-ilm, is naqis. We don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, for example, in our lives. Even some of the stuff that we lived, we can't remember. Some stuff we just happened yesterday, we can't remember. But Allah, huwa al-alim. He is the all-knowing. Al-hakim, the all-wise. As-sami', the all-hearing. He can hear the step of a tiny ant on a smooth rock in the middle of the night, from above his throne. And we talked about before how great his arsh was, and how great Allah Azza wa Jal fawq al-arsh, above the arsh. So these are some of the principles we should take in mind when we use Allah's names and attributes to call upon Him. Inshallah, I thought it'd just be fitting to give a little side lesson about that. Inshallah, it was beneficial. And if you all have any questions, we can go into questions now. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروا الغفور الرحيم. So oppression or dhulm is like a form of injustice, basically, and it can be a minor form or it could be a major form, but it could be anything. For example, in this story that we mentioned by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, the oppression was a form of slander, like he slandered a person's reputation, right? A person, could be an innocent, and he doesn't know like something is being said behind his back, and it can ruin his reputation. He has no idea about it, right? And that's a form of dhulm. And so he finds out about it and he makes dua against the person that did it, and his dua could be accepted. When you imprison somebody unjustly, for example, that's a form of dhulm, oppression. If you are capable, like you have a strength over another person, and you use your strength to take advantage of that person, that's a form of oppression, right?
You get a sin for it?
For
if you're making a dua against someone, you get a sin for it?
No, because like those are one of the cases that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made permission to make dua against a person. إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ, except who was done injustice to. So he can choose to make dua against that person, or he can be nicer and forgive that person, for example. But we don't want to be on the receiving end. That's the point. So اتَّقِ الدَّاعِ الْمَظْلُومِ, be careful for the dua of the one who is oppressed.
I was going to add to that.
I mean, if you feel like for sure that you're being oppressed, you can make dua against that person. But if that person is not really oppressing you, then maybe Allah won't answer that dua because you're not of the oppressed. Well, Allah knows best though. Yeah, so that's what some of the scholars say, that the best dua is to make the one that's in the Quran or the Sunnah, because those are known to be good. And like she was saying, sometimes you might make dua, you might ask for something and it's not good for you, and Allah grants it to you. It might be in one of those instances that we were talking about. You might have made it at the right time, in the right place, in the right state, and it went up into heaven and it got answered, right? So say for example, a person made dua for a Ferrari, and he got the Ferrari, right? And then that Ferrari, he was going so fast in it because it's a sports car and he loves his speed and everything, and he got in an accident and he became crippled for the rest of his life. Or a person made dua for a certain spouse, like, oh, that's the love of my life, that's the most perfect person, and this and that, please give me him or her as my spouse. And then they get married, and then they find out that person is like, A'udhu billah min ash-shaytan rajim. This person I thought was so good is like really like a shaitan, I was fooled. So be very careful, like always do like dua istikhara and like put it to Allah Azza wa Jal, because you don't know the batin. In particular, like in marriage and stuff like that, sometimes like some of my shuyukh taught me that like be very careful about appearances, because they can be deceiving. And he said, even if you find like the most beautiful man in the world, physically beautiful, or the most beautiful woman in the world, they say like after a certain amount of time it wears off. It's the beauty of the heart that's going to keep going and you'll be happy with, inshallah. But the physical beauty can, even if she's like supermodel, or he's a whatever I call a supermodel as well, I don't know, and just being with that person on a regular basis, it gets like normal. It's like you just become a normal person after like a couple of months, some say at the most, for example, because you just get used to it. That initial love is gone. So sometimes making dua for a specific person could be dangerous, right? Or a specific thing. So it's better to make general du'as that Allah Azza wa Jalla taught us, or the Prophet ﷺ taught us. And our main goal in this life is to get to akhirah, to Jannah, right? So the dua, the most important dua is like, oh Allah, give us paradise, right? Save us from the hellfire. Because everything we get in the dunya, anything we ask from the dunya, it's permissible, we can, inshallah. But the good one to say for that is رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Give us the good of this world and the good of the next, and save us from the hellfire, the punishment of the hellfire, right? Or ask for all the good that the Prophet ﷺ asked for and the Salihin, and to take refuge in Allah from what the Prophet ﷺ sought refuge in and all the Salihin sought refuge in. Inshallah, yes, the du'as are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He understands all languages, so you can call on Allah Azza wa Jal with any language you know. If you can learn the ayat and ahadith in Arabic, it's better because that's like the original du'a itself. However, if you're unable to for some reason, you can make du'a in any language. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears from anyone and He knows, Also, I was saying like be fearful of the du'a of the oppressed. The scholars say that it applies, to Muslims and non-Muslims as well. Like Allah can hear the du'a of the non-Muslim as well. So just because a person is non-Muslim, you can't be oppressor to him. Allah, He hates oppression. Do never be of those who are oppressors. Those are the worst type of people. Like the bullies or the ones that use their power to abuse authority. These type of people are the worst in the sight of Allah Azza wa Jal. The characteristic of Fir'aun or Qarun or Haman. These people have kibr, and they use their kibr and use their strength, use their wealth to oppress other people. Never be like that. If Allah Azza wa Jal gave you advantage over others, for example, thank Allah and use it for their benefit, to help others. Always be the one who is like fighting against oppression, and never be of those who are oppressing. Okay, so...
Does it have family?
Yeah. So... Alright, so the question was about the jinn, how they can have, marry and have families like humans basically, and what about the shaitan? So the jinn basically is a shaitan. So Adam and Eve, they were married and they had offspring. Iblis, he married and he has offspring. He's the head of the shaitan. His offspring are jinn. And just like there's good and bad humans, there's good and bad jinn. Right? And they have their own world that they live in. They have families, and they have lives, and they have, just like humans, basically. We can't see them though. That's the difference. And they have certain powers that we don't have also. No, it's just another word. The jinn are the offspring of shaitan. So Iblis, the devil, the head shaitan, the one who got kicked out of paradise, that's the father of the jinn. All his offspring are considered jinn. And he has good jinn and bad jinn, like believer.
Allah created a shaitan jinn?
Shaitan is the father of the jinn. Like Adam.
How did he have, so he had children?
Yes.
He got married.
He had offspring, yes.
He got married to whom?
I mean, I don't know if he got married or he just has Shaitana, the wife of the shaitan, whatever, she's the spouse of shaitan, and they have offspring. Allahu A'lam, yani. Yeah. But they're the same. Yeah, the jinn is as a kind of... Actually, the shaitan, the scholars, they say the shaitan is like the bad jinn. Okay, and the regular jinn, you just call them jinni. Okay. But they're all jinn. Yeah. Allah knows best. And there's like a really confusing one too. Can the jinn marry with humans? But that's another topic we won't get into, inshallah. No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we didn't say we don't call upon other people, like in the sense that you use their names to call upon to Allah. You know what I mean? I didn't get into that one, but I was saying like if you go to like a pious person and ask them to make du'a for you, like that's not. Some scholars say that like when you use intermediary in your du'a, like some scholars might say that's like a form of shirk, for example, right? So that's not what I was talking about. I was talking about when you call upon Allah Azza wa Jal, when you ask others to call Allah for you. Like, a person is very pious and he's like, someone who's a scholar, for example, or he's very close to Allah. And you can see like he has a strong love of Allah. Maybe his dua is accepted, so you can go to him and ask him to make dua. Like one of the tabi'een, the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba about him, Awais al-Qarni, and he was known for his dua to be accepted. And Umar radiallahu anhu, he was looking for him through his whole life to try to find him so he can make dua for him, right? And it was known that he was very pious to his parents, his mother especially. He took care of her, and he was so pious in his dua. And when people found out about him, they rushed to him to ask him to make dua, and he kind of like ran away afterwards because he didn't want to be tried like that. But so there's certain people that you can ask to make dua for you, that inshallah the dua will be accepted. So that's one of the forms to get closer to Allah. Like you can use basically all the means you can get. Like ask your parents to make dua for you because the dua of the parents for the child is accepted, something like that. Or like a sheikh or imam or someone who's very close to Allah. At the time of the Sahaba used to ask the Prophet ﷺ to make dua for them. And even one narration, I'm not sure of its authenticity, but the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba when they were going for Hajj, "La tansana fi du'aikum," don't forget us in your dua. So this is one of the form of wasila, or one of the ways to get closer to Allah by the dua of other people that are pious. And what are the other two I mentioned? His names and attributes. That's the most important one. And then by your good deeds. So Allah says in Ali Imran, ربنا إننا سمعنا منادي ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا. Oh our Lord, like we heard a caller to believe in you and we believed in you. فآمنا فاغفر لنا. So forgive us. So you're asking Allah in this dua in Surah Ali Imran, in this ayah, by your iman in Him and your belief in Him, oh Allah, forgive me, right? And there's another famous story by the three that got trapped in the cave. You know, they were in a cave and then the boulder fell down and they were stuck in there. So each one of them asked Allah by a certain dua, by a certain good deed that he used to do, to lift the rock from him. You know, one of them, he said, for example, he had a beautiful like woman that he wanted to marry, you know, but he couldn't really afford it or something like that. Or no, he just wanted to have relations with her, incorrect relations, outside of marriage. And right before he was about to have relations with her, she said like, fear Allah, and he stopped, right? Because she was like in a state of hardship and she needed money, and he was going to give her money to do that evil act. But then she was like scared, you know, she had never been with a person before, and she said like, fear Allah, and he stopped right there, and he gave her like money anyway, and he left that evil act, right? And then the other one, he used to have parents that he would serve and love very much, to the point that, you know, he won't sleep until he makes sure that they've eaten. And one night, they fell asleep before he got to bring them their milk. So even his own kids were hungry, but he stood outside the home of his parents waiting for them to wake up so he can give them the milk. That's how much he loved his parents. And the third one was, a person that had like a worker work for him, and he left his wages with that person, and the person reinvested the wages, and this worker came back like after some, you know, many maybe years or a long time. Basically, he came back to this man. He asked him for his wages that he had earned initially from him, and the man said, you see that valley of sheep and animals and livestock, that's all for you. And he said, stop making fun of me, just give me my wages, let me get out of here. He said, no, that's your wages, I invested it for you, and that's what you have, so take it all, it's all yours, right? And then Allah, He lifted the rock up. So these three good deeds, these men, they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift the rock up using these good deeds. That's the other proof, you know, that we can call upon Allah with our good deeds. And as she said, the first and most important one was Allah's names and attributes, and we said the ayat for that. You know, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا. Allah has the most beautiful names, for call upon Him with them. Any other questions or? Salah? Okay. Subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.